Um, yeah, I think you raised a few important points that we really have to think about it, and we really have to find a solution that is amicable to all, to the citizens, also to the government of the day as well. And I think your last point in asking for, for the opposition and the government to come together, to get their act together, is a very good suggestion. But I do not know whether it's possible to achieve that kind of solution or not. I think it was being proposed before, but I guess everybody yearns for power, right? Yeah. If you can get 2.3 billion in your account, then everybody wants to have that kind of power. So yeah, with that, I think you have burning questions to ask, and could you introduce yourself and pose your questions to any of the panelists or to Mr. Akyol? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Liana. According to religious authorities, I'm a deviant Muslim. Anyway, my question to the panelists is actually about class. Because I've been reading a lot of articles about ISIS and how they recruit people and things like that, and it came from this idea of insecurity, of course, but also about how oppressed people are in current governments, and that's why they believe in a caliphate, and that this is the idea that is being propagated, right? That how we are treated in our current political situations are repressive to us and oppressive, and we don't have enough rights or enough economical power. So it's about being oppressed, and so that's why they believe in this caliphate. So what do you think about this? Is the solution then actually about economy, or making Muslims all over the world being able to feel empowered rather than insecure?
Thank you, Liana. Can we take another 2 more questions here, please?
Good afternoon. My name is Eugene. Before my question, I just want to express a note of appreciation to the various panelists. Dr. Mustafa, your presentation was most enlightening. And as I listen to the various speakers, what comes to mind is that there is an urgent need for reform in Islam itself. I'm speaking from a non-Muslim or people of faith other than Muslim. But what comes across this morning was very clear that there is a need to reform Islam itself, and to use the word of Dr. Mustafa, to find an appropriate model of Islamic governance, justice, that encompass universal values like mercy, compassion, which Zainal has spoken about very much. So as we talk about reform in Islam, my question is that it brings to mind that a lot of this is more of a internal Muslim challenge. First and primary, it gives the impression that this is more of an internal Muslim challenge, that non-Muslims, people of other religion than Islam, have very little contribution. So really the question here is this: if a non-Muslim says, yes, I am with you, I want to contribute to the reform of this Islam so that it can contribute to a more liberal democracy, a more progressive society. My question really is, from a non-Muslim community, what can we do? Because the word now is that if we want to come on board in this attempt or this effort to reform Islam, they will come and tell us, this is a Muslim matter, you are non-Muslim, you got nothing to do with it. By the way, you non-Muslim don't even understand our religion. What can we do? So really the question here is, from a non-Muslim community, say, yes, we want to be with you, we want to journey with you. What can we really do? That's the first question. The second question is more relating to what Dr. Haslina have said. And she has given some very useful strategy. But as I interact with my Muslim friends all over, ordinary folks on the street seems to have this caution. You guys are all these liberal people, you guys are the fellas who, yeah, I agree with you, that's what they tell me. I agree with you. Yes, good presentation, good thoughts, and I agree with you. But to ask me to come out and, say something, or to ask me to come out and do something, that will automatically sever my ties with my friends and family members. And so they take a more cautious approach. They take a more insular approach, and they don't want to do anything. They take a approach that says that if I come and identify with, Dr. Farida is there, Farida is here, then straight away we are branded. And because we are branded, we will sort of be viewed with suspicion, and there's this fear, and therefore this ties is cut. And then they say, how can I go back and reach my friends and my relatives and so on and so forth, which have already branded me. So perhaps a more, coming from Dr. Haslina, if you could tackle this question and offer some maybe useful suggestion from your experience as to how, you can overcome this kind of caution, this kind of, it is a real thing. It's a real thing that is in the minds and the feelings of a very genuine, sincere Muslim, but they have this approach. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eugene. Can we have one last question before we open? Yeah. Azrul?
Hi. Assalamu alaikum. Just wanting to ask a question. Perhaps Dr. Mustafa could share some insight on this. There's been a lot of talk about interfaith dialogue, especially with regards to the past few years in the Malaysian narrative. And there is a problem here, because how do you begin a dialogue or want to initiate a dialogue with a group of people who reject the very premise that there are other religions? We've had a problem because there is very often lip service that's paid towards dialogue such as this. Everybody sounds nice, everybody's friendly with each other, things are said and they're all nice, warm and fuzzy, except they don't really believe in it. And one of the things that we always have is when we have discussions with religious authorities especially, they say very clearly that they reject the idea there is pluralism, that there is religious diversity, and the fact that by recognizing that there are other religions, therefore it would invalidate their own faith. Therefore, they refuse to engage constructively, sincerely, but also if they do engage, it is based on a platform of their own choosing, meaning it is a position of power. They do not regard other faiths around the table as being equal to them. So how do we get a genuine discourse, something that we can actually hang our hat on whenever we have people around the table of different faiths? So if you could share your insights on that, would be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Azrul. I think I'll let Mr. Akil to answer first before the rest.
Well, thank you so much for all the questions. And first, a few observations on what has been spoken here. I've learned a lot from the panelists as well. Thank you so much. Probably this is pointed out maybe a million times in Malaysia, but I'm amazed at this ban on the word Allah on Christians.
I prayed to Allah in the Middle East.
I know. I mean, in Arabic, of course, the word Allah is used. In Turkish, Christians use the word Allah too. And more importantly, in the Quran, there's a verse which says, speaks of churches, synagogues, and mosques in which Allah's name is recited and revered. So according to the Quran, Christians are using the word Allah, and that's a good thing. So I'm really amazed how nationalism in the name of Islam can blind people to the universal, I think, values and truths and universal ecumenism of Islam. But I respect the laws of Malaysia. I don't want to be, put on a urgent flight back to my country quickly. So I'm just sharing this as a theoretical point of view. And I also loved how Zaina explained the male domination aspect. I used to say, Sharia is mostly men-made. And maybe it's better to say Sharia is mostly male-made. Zaina gave me that inspiration. Thank you so much. Coming back to the questions, is there a class dimension? Very good point. There is always a sociological, socio-political, economic dimension to the religious issues that we are discussing. In my book, actually, I try to explain how in early Islam, the more liberal schools of thought evolved in centers of trade, and the more desert-based understanding of Islam has been harsher, and the bourgeois tended to be more cosmopolitan and more parochial approaches. So there's always that in today too. In particular, speaking of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and groups like that, especially ISIS, they present a radical utopia. And the people who are drawn to radical utopias tend to be mostly coming from unhappy backgrounds. That radical utopia could be communism. It was communism, actually. ISIS is very similar to Khmer Rouge in many ways. In the 60s and 70s, there were radical communist groups in Europe too. With a violent revolution, they would bring a beautiful world. Until that beautiful utopia came to be, they had to kill a lot of people. But at the end, it would be blissful for everybody. Yes, this is in that sense a class issue, but class is not merely economic class in the Marxist sense. It could be just you're feeling alien in a society that looks at you as alien just because of your color, because of your background. So class maybe in an economic sense, but you could, look at the event in US, for example, in San Bernardino. There were two people working in a company. They were not poor, but they felt alien because they were maybe demonized as Muslims by some people there who were maybe unwelcoming to Muslims. And actually, US is better in integrating people compared to Europe, but just feeling alien and looked down upon in a society out of economic issues or out of cultural issues can be the basis for the search for a radical utopia. And when the radical utopia comes, appealing to you with all the religious narrative and everything that appeals to you, that can be a toxic. So yes, there's always a socio-cultural issue, and that's why economic development integration is really important in the long term about all these, let's say, all these issues. But there is also a merely ideas aspect too, and that's why we should, when we look at ISIS, we should deal with ideology from an Islamic point of view. And yes, we should look at the background of the people who are inspired by ISIS and how do we deal with that background. In European cases, is how do you integrate Muslims? How do you make them feel British or French or Belgian and not people who are looked down upon and excluded by society? I think both aspects are very important. When we come to the second question on reform, the word reform is generally frowned upon by a lot of Muslims, and they understand it as if there's some problem, fundamental problem with Islam and we have to fix it. Well, there are fundamental problems with certain interpretations of Islam. And those, maybe the problems didn't exist when that interpretation existed in its own context. I tried to explain that yesterday, like the ban on apostasy, ridda, made sense in a medieval world when an apostate was generally a man who left the Muslims and joined the enemy army to become a combatant. So yeah, it was high treason. Today, if you bring that interpretation to today, you kill people because of their change of heart, and you can't do that. I mean, you shouldn't be doing that. So we certainly need radical reform, as Tariq Ramadan said. Not because we want to get rid of what God said in certain issues, but we have to re-understand that in a very different context. Plus, certain interpretations of Islam dominated over others out of political preferences, not because they were more valid. So we can reopen those discussions in that sense. We don't need the Luther kind of reform because Luther was operating in a different world. There was the Catholic universe dominating, and they wanted to claim independence from the Catholic. We don't have that problem. We actually don't have a central authority. So that's why the Luther analogy isn't very relevant. But we need reinterpretive reform of fiqh, for sure, of Sharia. About the term Islamic governments, what kind of Islamic governance need? For me, speaking of an Islamic state is like speaking of Islamic traffic or Islamic trash collecting. these are like rational, pragmatic issues. Will there be an Islamic traffic? Yes, maybe if you're a very careful driver and you respect to other drivers and you smile to people, that will be an Islamic way of arranging traffic. But traffic has certain laws. You should stop when you come to red, and that's universal. You don't like red, you want to make it Islamic and make it purple. Okay, if you are really insisted on doing things very differently. But I think governance is about how do we make people live together in cities and villages and in certain territories, and allow them to have basic rights and sustenance and all that. It is a pragmatic issue, and I think there is no specific Islamic way of doing it. There is no Islamic chemistry, there is no Islamic physics. There can be an Islamic approach, a philosophical approach to chemistry, seeing God's wisdom and power in what you're doing, but still you will do the same experiment that the Buddhist or atheist does. So there is inevitably a secular space in the sense that there are rational, and God has given us reason to look at these things. So we should look at governance, I think, from that point of view. There are certainly Islamic principles and values I think we can put into governance, and these would be justice and freedom and freedom of religion that we see in the Quran. And consultation, so it should not be despotic, it should be participatory way of governance. We can have those principles, but I don't know if that was the question, but that's what I recalled when I heard the question in my mind.
Have Islamic trolleys in supermarkets.
Yeah, Islamic trolleys, I heard that, yes. Anyway, I mean, that's still, if it's just a matter of choice, I'm not super alarmed by it, but I wouldn't worry about the trolley and how Islamic it is, personally. But if people worry as a matter of choice, okay. Interfaith dialogue, good question. Well, interfaith dialogue is fashionable in the past couple of decades. It's something very good and important, but sometimes it's just made for the sake of appearance. People come and smile at the cameras. Here's an imam, a rabbi, and a priest. They say, we all love each other, we're all Abrahamic. That's nice. I mean, I'm not against it, because even having that picture is something sometimes helpful. But yes, there needs to be more serious and dialogue, which you can learn from something, not just smile and go. I think in that sense, there are two aspects of interfaith dialogue. One is on the secular level, which means there are Muslims and Jews and Christians and Buddhists and no matter like whoever you want in this country. What are our common problems? What are our common issues? How do we live together? How can we have how can we have a concerted effort for protecting the nature or dealing with terrorism and violence or ignorance and so there are just things that we have to deal together. There are sometimes also practical issues coming from practices that are sometimes not allowed by secular states. In Europe today, there is a Jewish-Muslim alliance on the right to have circumcision and halal or kosher slaughter of animals. Jews and Muslims have a lot of practices. Actually, Judaism and Islam are very similar, although Muslims and Jews didn't get along well in this century, not before, because of actually Israeli-Palestinian problem. But very similar religions, law-based, the image of the Prophet, the Torah, the Quran, they're all very similar. Anyway, so there are sometimes kind of pragmatic issues on, again, the practices of these communities. Then there is the more theological level, like how do you understand God? How do we understand prophets? How do Muslims understand Jesus? I think these are important too. And of course there are big differences. But to see these differences, to articulate similarities, to articulate common grounds, to learn from something from the other tradition is, I think, important. One more thing there. Muslims generally never read the Bible. They're afraid to see it. Well, the Quran refers to the Bible and just says, go and ask the people of the book. The Quran sometimes alludes to a story very shortly because the rest is in the Bible. Like Job or Ayub. In the Quran, he's just mentioned in a few verses, and you just learn that he had a sickness and he healed. You don't know who he was. You learn it when you read the Old Testament. There's a whole big chapter, and it's very impressive. And it actually, the Quran refers to it. So that is why in early Islam, Islamic scholars learned from Jewish Christian traditions. That's why we have this tradition called Israeliyat. It was accepted. Later it became notorious, oh, it's Israeliyat. But the Quran refers to the Bible, and that's why Muslims learn from it. So therefore we Muslims will be, I think, doing ourselves a favor when we understand and grant that we are in the Abrahamic family of monotheism as the latest version of it. We have disagreements with Jews and Christians on certain issues for sure, but we are coming from that, and that history is part of our history as well, and we will be enriched when we learn about those things. And then one thing is that we should not fear knowledge. If we fear knowledge, we are not making a good argument about our faith. The more we learn, we should be better Muslims. And if the more we learn, we are losing something, then there's something wrong about what we are claiming to. So in that sense, I think I agree with the view that we shouldn't fear to see crosses or Bibles and so on and so forth. And we will be more informed when we look at all these. And in that sense, interfaith dialogue will be good for us. It will be good for the Christians. Let's talk what jihad means. A lot of Christians ask, what is this jihad? Do you want to kill everybody who's a non-Muslim? No, it doesn't mean that. And, here's the Muslim understanding of that. We will be able to speak on these issues. Thank you.
Don't give up on us, okay? Just don't give up on us. I guess if, you see, I was the other day, I have to give this talk to these school children about Quran and science. I'm getting tired with this topic because it's always like, what is the science in the Quran? So I said, can I actually change it into Quran and scientific thinking? So the teacher said, okay. I come to a conclusion that, the base of Quran is always about you being curious, and it's always been put forward in questions, and you have to answer that, and you see how actually God answer all those questions. So to me, if a Muslim really read the Quran, he or she will become very scientific in his thinking. No doubt about that. So if you see a Muslim, any one of your friends, who are not really scientific in their thinking, so they're not really reading the Quran as how they should. And for those who are actually started off with scientific thinking, eventually they will actually bump into the Quran, because it's that way. Okay, so that's how. So most probably your contribution would be okay if you listen to a Muslim friend and he or she is relating to you something very, very non-scientific. So please tell yourself this is definitely not Islam. And most probably for you to go and find out what is actually the story behind that. So that might be the most practical advice that I can give. I want to talk a little bit more about that insecurity among Muslims, because that will be answering Azrul's question as well about pluralism. You see, my definition of Malay-Muslim dilemma, I don't know whether you agree with me, but this is my opinion. When the Malay-Muslim is thinking with the Malay thinking cap, they get into the extreme of the spectrum, become so insecure and so vulnerable and trembling. Just looking at the cross will most probably make my faith shaky. Passing through a church will be, that's it. So that's why we don't read the Bible, we don't even, this is to safeguard our I'm sick and tired about all this, this inferiority complex. We must be better than this.
Well, it's taught by public religious authorities.
Okay, that's it. Because that's actually where it is. That's where the problem comes from. The slogan and the rhetoric has always been that. So most probably now it's actually to, okay, I haven't finished with that one. But when they are thinking as Muslim, they are the other extreme. I'm holier than thou. I will actually go to heaven, whatever. I might be the worst person on earth, but I'm a Muslim, so I'll be there. So to me, Malay-Muslim dilemma is really stretching us thin. And we really have to come back to the middle, and to sort of tell ourselves that, hey, we are better than this, we are better than this. We have it inside us. So don't worry. You can just let people, well, even use the word Allah. How can I prevent you from doing that? But that will come into the pluralism. Okay, now that seems to be something which is a strict no words. Okay, I believe that pluralism actually is the celebration of diversity when I'm talking about the three. But when it comes to religion, there is actually two types of pluralism, which is convergent pluralism and divergent pluralism. You can disagree with me, but the one that is more or less has been seen as problematic, particularly for people who do not want pluralism to be in the, in terms of religious context, is like when you say that there's one God, many paths, so whatever you do, you can be of any religion, but you will go to the same God. That seems to be problematic because it will, of course, it will make us harmonious. No one is better than the other one, but it will erode that identity of you. Who wants to be a Muslim? Who wants to go to mosque or to church? Because we're all the same, we are just judged the same. Okay, so if you don't agree with me, then it's okay. But this is actually what the young generation, I would say, would conform to. I start to have this question in my Facebook. Why do I have to make sure that my girlfriend actually conform to my religion? Because that's religion. That is actually freedom of expression. I don't care who you are, what you did, as long as I love you. That kind of thing. So that might be the problem about this kind of pluralism. That most of us would really do not want our children to go there because it just erodes their religious identity. Okay. Now, to me, Islam actually teaches the divergent pluralism. You can still go to your own peak and define where you want to go, the divine, journey that you want to go, but we still can coexist. And to me, I'm coming back to that, lakum dinukum waliyadin.
Maybe people in tribes, non-Muslim, know each other.
Yes. Yeah. There is actually شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا, isn't it? I created you in tribes so that you can start to know each other. Yeah. So I guess so. If it's most probably this interfaith dialogue, I will not comment as what Mustafa is saying. I think that's totally the premise now. But this is what I've been sort of going around with, telling people, don't be afraid of the words pluralism. Yeah, because of course you have to sort of in Islam when you are saying your shahada, then you know that is actually Allah that you worshipped. Another person might say that his or her God is also named Allah, but he or she would describe it differently, describe the God differently. So I think it's fine. And if we actually follow this, we'll still stick to our religious identity. And to me, a better Muslim, a practicing Muslim, would definitely welcome another, practicing Christian and another practicing Buddhist, because we will be talking on the same level. It's the non-practicing, most probably. As you know, it's not just inter-religious diversity, it's also intra-religious diversity. We actually practice our religion differently. Yeah? And it's very unfair to just describe a religion by just the practice of one or two. So I think that's the point.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Dr. Lena. Can I have Dr. Fletcher, please?
Okay, Liana, in terms of class, if we think that one of the origins of people joining ISIS, as I prefer to call it, the Islamic Caliphate of Rolex Baghdadi, he wears a Rolex watch, the Islamic Caliphate of Rolex Baghdadi is poverty, then why, during the Bali bombings in 2000, was a university lecturer in Johor Bahru one of the leading people, educated with a PhD, with a very good middle upper class background? He was a terrorist, as that long ago. So I agree with Mustafa Akyol that class is one element, but I think we need to look at ISIS from a whole variety of lenses, including the fact that they are pillagers and plunderers and capitalists of the first degree, selling antiquities on the black market, selling petrol and so on, and so the amount of money they can give to all over the place, including the Saudis who do their technology for them, is another story. Leave that alone. Let's go to Eugene's question about reform. I agree with Mustafa. That was a particularly Christian thing. We had a very corrupt Catholic Church at that time, popes who were corrupt, and Martin Luther went and nailed his reform on a Catholic church door. To me, it was one of the best things that happened to us Catholics, which is why I have offered to go and party with Lutherans on World Reform Day. I don't know if the Catholics are thrilled about it, but never mind. And we reformed. But it's very difficult to go and tell Muslims to reform because they have no Vatican, and that's what Mustafa said. They have no central authority. To me, that is both a blessing and a problem. It is a blessing because if Muslims will look at the enormous resources that they have, the enormous scholars who have written very well, defended their work, then they have got so many resources to understand Islam in ways that they want to be pious. But if you want, Eugene, a central reform, I don't think it is for us to ask it of Muslims. I think it is for Muslims to decide among themselves how they're going to come upon it, and perhaps that's why Farouk calls his a renaissance. In terms of what can actually be done as perhaps reformative, very little known in tafsir is the word iktilaf. So for example, here they love to use the work of At-Tabari, Jami al-Bayan at-Tawil al-Quran. And so At-Tabari is the most wonderful exegete. But do you know that it is a tradition in tafsir that you must acknowledge the difference of opinion of everybody else? At-Tabari would sometimes be very rude and say he's a cross-eyed donkey. But seriously, but he would then give his own opinion. So in other words, this inclusion, this pluralism, this acceptance of difference is inherent in the tradition. It's simply not known. Okay, moving on. Khalina, I would say that one of the things about the insecurities is that it is constantly stoked by power, by religious authority, for example. Muslims are always under threat. Malays are always under threat. Malays will lose their rights to their land, to the other races. And Ketuanan Melayu has spilled over into Ketuanan Islam. And it is very clear from even the official sermons, Muslims are under threat. There's a Jewish conspiracy, there's a lesbian and gay conspiracy. So there's a siege mentality which then does not enable Muslims to say, I'm willing to look elsewhere and be open because I'm threatened, I dare not. I think this is the disfavor, and this is what I call the infantilization. Finally, Azrul on interfaith dialogue. Hiya, I gave up on it a long time ago, please don't ever quote me, yeah? Because, again, I think we've got the most wonderful speaker today. We all go there and we say all the nice things, you know, all the good things in our traditions, but none of the Muslims will say, oh, we have Surah 9, Ayat 39, which says, fight with them until the last year, until they are brought down low, when Christians and Jews broke that treaty with the Prophet. And the Christians will talk about perfect love and perfect forgiveness, when until Vatican II, Catholics used to call other people who were good people anonymous Christians. I think that's terribly insulting. So we had Vatican II, we had reform. It is difficult in interreligious dialogue when the other person, I'm just going to be honest, when the Muslims come to the table as superior. And I'll give you a classic example. In 2005, we tried to form the Bar Council Human Rights Committee, Hakam, which I'm a part of, led by the late, great Raja Aziz Adrus, civil society people like Sisters in Islam. We tried to form an interfaith commission because right now, the only recourse for non-Muslims, for people of other faith, when they have problems with terms of religion and Islam, is to go to court. And our courts are an adversarial dynamic. That should be the last recourse. We need something in between to mediate, like we have Suhakam. We even did a draft legislation to put before the government that was Pakla, and made it as toothless as Suhakam was. And then at the last moment, the extremist NGOs got to Pakla and he withdrew. He was all ready to come and open our conference, and then he withdrew. And the Interfaith Commission, which we need desperately, Azrul, before we can even dialogue, just died. But we can't have dialogue when the other side comes to the table and says, we are superior to you. And in the terms, my last point, in terms of pluralism, as Halina says, okay, we may use the word Allah, but my Allah is different from your Allah, and we don't know how we're all going to end up where. Hello, we just heard about Murjia. It's not for us to decide, but God who decides who's going to heaven and what kind of heaven, and I have a funny feeling we're all going to be there in the same place. So why are we so worried about, your Allah a bit different from mine Allah? I have argued, and this is the thing about studying another religion, so go and study Christianity so you can argue with me. I have argued, you have 99 beautiful names for Allah. I see it written on the cupola of mosques, the most beautiful mosques. Does that mean you worship in that mosque 99 Allahs? No. Because your Shahada says, La ilaha illallah, there is no God but Allah, your monotheism. We're monotheistic too. We have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But like your 99 names, we've got 3 names for them. One God. We start every Sunday with the creed, I believe in one God. So it's semantics. And the final word on semantics is tolerance. I hate that word because the etymology of the word tolerance, before even what Halina said in the dictionary of, I will endure you, comes from the 18th century version of medicine, where I cure you with poison. And I see how much poison you can tolerate before you either are cured or you die. That's the etymology of the word tolerance. Let's stop using it. I just don't like it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Aston, do you have anything to say?
I'll just try to make this as quick as possible. I think the first thing, you have to bear in mind, at least for a government to properly function, is that, and this used to be the case with Malaysia, but it has since changed. Civil servants have to understand this, and I think this is something that the public has to speak about a lot, and that is, when you come to your office, you leave your religion at home. And I think that that's the problem in a lot of times in the Malaysian government. These things related to dress codes and what you can publish and things like that. There are lots of religious undertones behind it that should be kept at home. Religion is a private matter in the large scheme of things where government is concerned. Because people must have a neutral government, a fair government, a government that doesn't make decisions based on religion or their own, religious conscience. So that is something that has to be promoted at all times. That's number one. Number two, the public education on the role of religious authorities is something that I think we really have to start looking at this. And to me, the answer is really clear. It's all written in the Constitution. The role of these authorities are only really confined to really just 2 areas: matters of religious doctrine and Islamic family law. That's it. Fatwas on vape, fatwas on female genital mutilation, fatwas on transgender operation, these are out of the bounds of religious authorities. You have no competence to talk about medical issues and these related issues. You must just keep quiet about this. Respect those who are supposed to make decision on these issues, and other people will respect your jurisdiction or competence to make decisions on matters relating to religion. These people, they come out and say, like G25 for instance, they come and say things like, these people are deviants. What is deviant about G25? These people are talking about constitutionalism, and even if you want to say liberalism, this kind of political, language, liberalism, conservatism, it doesn't interest me or even impress me, because it doesn't mean anything at the end of the day. What you want to achieve is a state where people can live justly and they don't feel that they have to act in a way that is in any way contrary to their beliefs. And even if you want to talk about liberalism, the word liberal is there in Rukun Negara. So there's no way in the world you can ever look at someone like the G25 and say that these people are deviants. And we must understand that what G25 is doing really is taking things to the public space. This is not a religious matter, so you have no business. These religious authorities have no business commenting on this. They should keep your mouth shut and just observe matters. Try to understand more, That's number 2. Number 3, a culture of dissent is always needed. It is what gives democracy its meaning. It is why democracy is even there, to ensure that the best piece of information, the truth is given to, power is given to the truth at the end of the day. So you have to take steps. You have to speak out. You have to associate yourself with civil society groups. You have to keep going. No matter people don't listen to you, that doesn't mean that you stop doing what you want to do, because at the end of the day, if you don't take or do anything, there's really no one else who's going to do it, and the country will go to the dogs. And then really, it will come to a point where you may not even be able to change it anymore, and you don't want to reach that. In Malaysia right now, to me, I see it, we've got our structure in place. We just need to make sure that the people are following that structure. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Hassan. And Zainab, you have the last say.
I'll just take the question that Eugene asked, 2 parts of the question about the role of non-Muslims and the issue of Muslims, fear that Muslims have. Really, I always tell my non-Muslim friends who say, whenever we try to speak out, we're silenced, we're put down and all that. Really, I seriously believe that the non-Muslims, I hate to use the word non-Muslims, people of other faith, form 40% of the population of Malaysia. The laws, Islamic laws, affect them, and you can see this now in the cases that are coming to court. It's not just Islamic law, it's just about Muslims and doesn't have anything to do with you, therefore you have no right to speak out on these matters. It is not true. And so they have a right to speak out. But the other thing too, is the issue of, and Sisters in Islam certainly work with the political parties, with members of parliament of other religions, to give them knowledge about how to speak out, what do you say, how do you challenge some of the issues that are brought into parliament, because the Chinese and the Indian and the Kadazan Dayak members of parliament have Muslims in their constituency. Yeah, they represent those Muslims as well, and the issues affect non-Muslims too. The other thing too also, I've been trying to find out from Chinese millionaires, multimillionaires, and billionaires, I really feel they have an important role to play. And I've asked one of them, look, when you meet with the Prime Minister to talk about investment policy and business policy and inflation or whatever, do you bring up these issues? And they said, no. I said, why not? Well, it's not our place to bring up. And then, of course, it's controversial. And then they've got far more important things, like how do we make our next billion, to talk about, rather the government's silence and abdication of responsibility on all these contested matters. And I really feel that if our business leaders, and in particular, the non-Muslims, in particular the Chinese, the rich Chinese community, take this issue seriously and bring this up as part of policy making. Yeah? Because one political analyst said, already foreign investors and political risk analysts are already identifying the radicalism, conservatism, intolerance in Malaysia as a risk factor in whether they want to do business in Malaysia or not. And not only that, they have already identified the silence of the political leadership as a risk factor. You know, and if the foreigners are already identifying that, I'm sure all these business people who have far more clout on the Prime Minister and the government than we do in civil society, they really should play their responsibility. You know, because sometimes I get tired also, like, when are you Muslims going to change? Like, as if it's our responsibility alone. This is the responsibility of all citizens of this country, and not just the Muslim citizens of the country. So, Eugene, please do. Speak out, and if you have multimillionaire, billionaire friends, put a sense of responsibility in them that this is not just a Muslim issue. It is a national issue. The other thing about the, you were saying about how so many of your Muslim friends privately agree with what is being said, but fear to speak out because fear of ostracization, branding, and all that. You know, knowledge is power, and I think, as everyone said, there is so much richness in the Islamic tradition, and there is so much ignorance among Muslims about the Islamic tradition. And it makes me want to cry, because the more I learn about Islam, the more I love my religion, the more I know how just, the religion is, And knowledge is power. Voice is power. To have a voice, to be able to speak out publicly like this, is to recognize that your ideas matter. You matter as a human being. And so much of the problems we face is that the Islamic tradition, is a tradition of received knowledge. We receive the knowledge from authority, traditional authority. And if that knowledge is not from that traditional authority, it's delegitimized. That has been our tradition. And very often that knowledge comes from men. And if you have a kapia, you have a beard, no matter how ignorant you are, and I'm told Ustaz Hadi's Arabic is really atrocious. When he speaks in Arabic, it's really bad. And yet we think, he is like this authority. Even the late Ni Aziz, we had a dialogue session with him, and I asked him on the hudud law, and I really asked him detailed questions on the hudud law. And he said, saya tak pandai fikah. So when you question them and ask them to explain, then the truth comes out. Saya tak pandai fikah, soal fikah awak tanya Ustaz Hadi. Hukum hudud ni semua Ustaz Hadi, bukan saya yang buat. I asked another Kepiah man, dia kata death penalty to those who live Islam. I said, what is the basis of that? What does the Quran say about that? And I said, it's not in the Quran. Death penalty is not in the Quran. He didn't believe me. Then it was a public forum, so he said, he asked, at that time he was in PAS, now he's in UMNO. And then, so he asked his PAS friends in the audience, please, what is the Quranic verse on death to apostates? Of course there's no Quranic verse. So knowledge is so important to challenge and to create an alternative voice and an alternative, basis for justice and for equality. But because we're still at either that silent stage of knowing or the received knowledge, we're so scared of questioning. There's so much fear. When actually, if you read, and there's so many things to read, now with Google, you just Google Mustafa Akil. All his articles will come out. Before I came, I quickly Googled so that I know a little bit more about him. It's all there. The question is, do we want to learn or not? Do we want to build our knowledge or not? Do we want to respect that Islam that we so love, by being a good Muslim, by acquiring knowledge? And we have to move beyond this authoritarian received knowledge position that most of us are at, that only those with authority have the right to speak. Then I say, take Islam out of the public sphere. Don't use Islam as a source of law and public policy. Then what these people in authority say, you can't send us to jail, you can't chop off our hands, you can't punish us, you can't fine us. But if you want to use Islam as a source of law and public policy, everybody has a right to speak out. And you will be attacked when you speak up. So this is where the knowledge comes in. If you have your knowledge, you can stand your ground. You can defend your position. And you can share that knowledge so that we all together, collectively, we build a more informed society about the place of Islam within a democratic constitutional framework. Yeah, like Hassan said, the Constitution has many, many parameters, guidance, fundamental liberties already, and this exists within Islam as well. But where is the, how do we bring this into reality? So right now there's just so much disconnect, between the law, how it's practiced, between reality, and the sources, the rich sources in the Quran and fiqh and tafsir literature, and principles, conceptual principles that exist within the Islamic tradition, that if we are serious, we can actually bring about the kind of reform that we want. But we're not serious. We're just using Islam for political purposes, for identity politics, because of fear, because of, for many, many reasons. So I really feel that, let's all get serious, acquire knowledge. I think it's wonderful what IRF is doing, translating all these books into Bahasa Malaysia to get a wider audience. And really right now as I speak, Sisters in Islam is doing a training with 30 women, single mothers, whom we have worked with over the past few years to really build their voice. Voice is so important to your sense of dignity. These are single mothers who have suffered for decades with men who are irresponsible, And they talk, and very often it's people like us, these are liberals, westernized elites. But you work with the single mothers, they know exactly what we're talking about, Because they are tired women who've dealt with so much irresponsible men in their lives. And they talk about their men, they're lost in space, gone with the wind, what's the other one? Missing in action, and they're tired, so they want justice, And really, without justice, there is no Islam. Where is this justice of Islam that we talk about? And until women experience that justice of Islam, don't talk about Islam, tapi contentnya tak ada, maknanya tak ada, devoid of meaning to the realities of lives today. Thank you.
Thank you, Zaina. Thank you for
Farouk, just one thing.
Yep.
Don't switch off the tape, because I'm very glad Zaina said all the non-Muslims must speak up. Well, this non-Muslim spoke up and paid the most horrendous price when she came back with a PhD. Death threats, rape threats, sedition, investigation, reported to the Conference of Rulers for insulting Islam. So please, as many of you go and study Islam, so that there are too many of us, they can't go and harass us. But Zaina, you think before you say you're non-Muslims, go and speak about Islam. Hey, my university silenced me officially, wrote me a letter and told me to shut up.
No, really, for me, serious. This is a price you must be willing to pay. Because change is not going to happen if we all keep quiet because we're scared that this is that and that. Sisters in Islam endlessly being persecuted. We've got a fatwa now, that we're a deviant group, and our very existence is a threat to Islam. How pathetic that is,
I'm not fighting with you, dear. I am telling you, I paid the price.
Yeah, I know. And
just. No, Zaina, seriously though, just so that people are aware.
Yeah.
Today was very much an awareness
thing.
No,
I absolutely
Speak
agree.
up, but be aware. They will come for you with a sledgehammer.
I mean, you look at G25.
No, Farida Arifin makes one sentence and that's it. I was told, Chandra Muzaffar told me, before you even came back, the ulama were waiting for you. They were going to silence you. Okay, so that's all. Enough. I'm hungry.
Come back and speak out more, okay? Stop the silence and the silence.
All right. We have very courageous women over here in the panels. And I would like to thank all the panelists and especially to Brother Mustafa. Thank you so much and I hope to see you again.